Well, hello. I was just looking at some tubes I'd found around the house from various rolls of paper that I was going to convert into rockets, or am going to convert into rockets. And while I'm talking about rockets, I want to thank Dreamberry 2 for his version of Rocket Man. I'll link below for all of us model rocketeers. And yes, I do say yes, because clearly I'm back in the hobby now. Well, I went on a little path of exploration today, and I didn't get a chance to come out and do anything in the Tarbis because I just had the one day off. I had a lot of things I had to get done. I did pretty much get them done, but I did have some time while I was waiting on things in lobbies and stuff today to start doing a little background. I got wondering, you know, instead of doing my next history video on a company, why not do it on a franchise like the kits of Star Trek? And this is no doubt inspired by my recent success with the Aurora video on the Mr. Spock figure. And I had learned a lot about the early Star Trek kits on that, and where I'm about to go, you don't have to be a Star Trek fan to appreciate, because this is a model story, not a Star Trek story. First off, I need to say that I'm also linking a channel below from Lucas Skeel, and he has done a nice little history on Monogram that actually puts some of the stuff puts in some of the stuff I had left out on mine. See, when I first did my my very first video that started this whole thing on the history of videos, the Revell Aurora Monogram video, I had done it all as 3 companies all in one video, and I needed to keep the time down. So since those were 3 of my favorite companies, building models as a kid, they were a natural place to begin. And I had books that were available to me. I bought Thomas Graham's books, and of course that made doing the videos much, much easier. But partly just to keep from running too long on the Monogram section, I had not really gotten into the Tom Daniel kits. And when I was doing all 3 videos, just a quick overview of each company, that made sense. But when I did them individually, all I really did was take each section and cut it loose as its own video with a different intro and outro. So you're basically getting the same video that you got in the 3-for-1 video, but not everybody wanted to see the history of all 3. Some people just wanted to see Aurora. And where Monogram was concerned, this was a huge oversight. Just taking that piece out and re-releasing it more or less as a clip show was a mistake, because that would have been the perfect opportunity to cover the Tom Daniel designs, but I didn't, and that was the single chief complaint on that video. Then of course that prompted me to start looking into Tom Daniel, and then of course he had a website. I made contact with him. He was more than happy to help, and I elected to go ahead and do his bio, which has had almost 100,000 hits in its own right. In fact, I have 2 versions of it. And of course this started an internet correspondence between myself and TD that's still happily going on to this day. And in fact, he sent me that GB that I've been working on, as well as the kit bash I did. So it's been a very, very, very fruitful relationship. I'm so thrilled that with being able to work with him and everything. It's just great, and a true talent. Well, the video you're going to see, if you link on to Skeel's video, he covers what I had left out. And so also he has an excellent timeline about the history of Monogram and Revell, which I'm going to borrow this slide from. And the reason I went doing this research dovetails with what I was talking earlier about the Star Trek kits. I was recently looking at the catalog of Revell online, and they didn't seem to have all of the stuff on their website that they have for sale. For example, their aircraft broke down to World War II, modern, and space. The only thing they had under space was the lunar module. They had a few jets under modern, but they didn't have any of the Cold War stuff, which obviously wasn't under the World War II section. But when I typed in a search F-102, they have an F-102 kit. So I'm not sure what the deal is on their website. Maybe they're out of stock. I don't know. But I found another video that I'm going to link where somebody goes to the 2020 catalog for Revell USA, and it seems to have a lot of stuff that's not on the website, and I got a little confused. But the reason I was doing that digging was I was, again, thinking about doing kits of Star Trek, and I saw that Revell and Monogram had both done some Star Trek, and Revell had done some Star Wars. And this got a little confusing because when you think of Star Trek and Star Wars, you usually think AMT and MPC. AMT, of course, was early to get into the Star Trek franchise. Of course, Aurora was early into it also, as we talked about in the Aurora files on the Spock. And then we start looking at, of course, MPC for the Star Wars stuff. Now, they're not the only ones that did it, but as I started digging, and I started running through the timeline. So real quick, 1986, Odyssey buys Monogram, and a few months later gets Revell. All right, so now they're both into the Odyssey group. In 1994, Hallmark gets the company, the Revell Monogram. And if I'm not mistaken, the first Monogram Star Trek kit I could find was 1995. Now this actually makes sense because Hallmark, if I am not mistaken, already had a licensing agreement for Star Trek. So once they got a kit model company, they would have very little difficulty in go ahead and start manufacturing kits. So that would explain Monogram's entry into it, and of course Revell being under the same house at that point could do them also at their leisure. Now, these were new molds. This had nothing to do with what AMT was putting out. In fact, they put out things like the Voyager and the Kazon ships and things like that that were not put out, I don't believe were put out by AMT. Anyway, so then around 2005, Revell starts putting out Star Wars kits. Now, from 94, Hallmark gets Revell Monogram. 97, they combine the logo, where it's Revell Monogram under one logo. In 2001, Alpha International acquires Revell Monogram. The next year, 2002, Gearbox Toys gets them. And Gearbox Toys keeps them for a while. Eventually, they sell out to New Revell, and in 2007, that's when Hobbyco gets them. Now, their first Star Wars kit came out in 2005. And I wasn't able to find out if it was Gearbox Toys or New Revell that owned them at this point, but apparently somehow they managed to get a Star Wars license at that point. Haven't been able to hash out the details on that. But, and then of course you go on to today. All of that's backdrop for what I was gonna bring up though. As I was doing my research, I stumbled onto something that was just too cool. Most of you guys probably have some idea who Matt Jeffries is if you're a Star Trek fan. He is the designer who came up with the design for the Starship Enterprise. He also designed the Klingon battlecruiser. He is, if you ever watch the later Next Generation or Voyager, they talk about Jeffries tubes and everybody's moving around, you know, in the bowels of the ship, they're moving through Jeffries tubes. Those were named in honor of Matt Jeffries. And Matt Jeffries came up with some really great designs. Well, I, like most people, operated under a bit of a misunderstanding about the Klingon battlecruiser. Now, I did know that the Klingon battlecruiser did not make an appearance until the third and last season of the original series. Its first episode was Elaine of Troyes. And I also noticed that it made quite an appearance. They made sure to give it a couple of beauty passes where you got a good long look at it by television standards, and there's a reason for this. Like everyone else, I just, and this was only made worse by the book that Stephen Poe put out about the making of Star Trek. I assumed that the Paramount, at this point, I believe they already gotten away from Desilu and over Paramount, which was, I believe, pretty cash-strapped at the time. And I figured, oh, we need this ship, you know, here, Matt, design us something cool and let's go make a model. And then we'll let AMT make it. But that is not what happened. When AMT started selling the Starship Enterprise model, it did so well in sales. And by the way, quick side note for those who don't recall, AMT got the rights by making the big full-size shuttlecraft and the interior set for the TV show. That was done in lieu of cash. They wanted a shuttlecraft and they didn't have the money to make one, so when AMT, Stephen Poe, came looking for the rights to make the model, they said, hey, tell you what, make us this big set, this big shuttlecraft and an interior set for it. and we'll give you the rights. And they did. That's how that happened. So the Enterprise sells very well. According to Scalemates, the Klingon Battlecruiser first kit came out in 1966, but I don't think that could be accurate because according to Matt Jeffries himself, he didn't design the thing until I think it was November 67. But it wasn't the studio that asked for it. It was AMT. I think it was Stephen Poe again, but the Enterprise was selling so well, they wanted a counter ship to it. You know, nothing sells better if you buy the primary kit than an adversary. So he went to Matt Jeffries and said, look, we need these Klingons. We've already determined that they're sort of the bad guys. They're sort of during the height of the Cold War when the show was made. If the Federation was the West, then of course the Klingons were the Russians and the Romulans were the Red Chinese and that kind of thing. So we need a very intimidating looking bad guy ship. Jeffries could not work on it at the studio because it wasn't in the budget, and that's just how all that works, and you get into, you know, work rules and unions and all that kind of stuff. But he did work on it at home, and he said it was his 24th drawing where he finally got the plan form right. And they ran off to this, AMT grabs this, runs off the studio and says, you know, this is what we want for the Klingon ship. We want to make this model. And of course the studio's like, we don't have money to make all this. And AMT's like, we'll make it, and you can take one for the show, but it's got to be in the show. It's got to have some beauty passes because we want to be able to sell these things, and we'll take care of producing the models, and we'll give you a studio model. So, well, the studio wasn't going to turn down a free spaceship, and it is a classic design. So, I'm going to put a link below to the page that gives you where I got a lot of this history, and it goes on to a lot more history that I'm not going to talk about here. But the only reason the Klingon Battlecruiser exists is because AMT wanted another kit to go with the Star Trek kit, with the Enterprise. And, of course, it was a huge success. Here's the cool part. They made two patterns, and they were made at twice scale and then pentographed down to cut the molds. And as soon as I got the molds working and got the kits coming out, he said they were popping one out every 20 seconds. Then there were two of them, and they had a few slight differences. The studio guys apparently just grabbed one of them. This is a big solid block of wood, and just whoosh, ran off with it to, all right, get it to the shop to paint it, and let's get it in front of the camera. Now, because the model was a solid block of wood, that's why, if you'll notice, it has no lights. Later on, of course, in the movies and everything, they would add all that, but for the TV show, you'll notice the Klingon ships, in the original footage, never have any internal lighting because they're just painted blocks of wood. Side note, and this gets into you guys who like to photograph your models, like I think we all do, the ship is not ghost gray or light blue or whatever you want to call that color it is, and it's not one color. It was made up of 3 separate colors. But when they shot it against the blue screen with all the studio lights, they got a lot of blue spill, and between the camera lights and the background and the reflections, the thing came out in this monotone color. It's actually green on top and light gray on bottom, and I think it was like a medium blue or gunmetal gray or something in other parts, but the whole thing just came out kind of monotone looking. Well, they didn't have time to do anything about it, but it actually was in the cartoon that the correct color pattern showed up for the first time. So make of what you want, what you will. You read the article, it goes into a lot of detail. But I thought it was just awesome that one of the most iconic science fiction vessels was not a product of the imagination of the writers or the desires of the studio, but of the kit makers who wanted something else to make because the companionship was selling so well. And that's just too cool for school. And anyway, guys, I just thought you would enjoy that little bit of history. And there's a lot more to it. The article goes into a lot more detail. It gets into the ones I made for the movies. By the way, one of those things is in the Smithsonian, but it's in storage. It only went out for a short time on display when they had the Star Trek exhibit. I had the good fortune to be living in Northern Virginia at the time, and went up to the Smithsonian and saw that exhibit. I have personally sat in Kirk's chair, the original one that was basically just a glorified wooden frame left when I sat in it. I saw that model Klingon ship and everything else. Unfortunately, this was before the day of digital cameras have now. I took some I also saw the original screenplay, and I can still remember one thing, where Roddenberry and his original proposal had the first page opened up where you could see it under glass, and it says that the captain of this vessel is based on Horatio Hornblower. He is a man who is driven but not driving. And of course today I would have clicked a gazillion pictures, but this is back in the 90s. And I was on a budget, but I also saw one of the original phasers, which is just carved out of wood. It was not the hero prop with the working parts. But that was just something I thought you guys would find terribly interesting. It's how a kit model company affected pop culture. Instead of making a model of what pop culture brought to us, a kit model company brought part of pop culture to pop culture. It created a part of pop culture. And that's, you know, and it's not unknown for kit model companies to impact the pop culture like that. And a classic example, as we were talking earlier, was TD, Tom Daniel. He created things that affected the pop culture. And so I just thought that was just cool. Thought you guys would enjoy that little story. And maybe I'll be able to put together a video on the history of Star Trek models, but I'm not 100% sure, because I'm going to tell you right now, once I got into it, this is just one kit, okay? Think about how much there is in the Star Trek universe. If I start going down the history, it's going to take a long time to put that one together. And so I don't think the Klingon model hit the shelves until 68 or 69 after it had aired on the show. That's one. Oh, by the way, one other quick note. The studio, at probably the prompting of AMT, made sure to show the Klingon ship as often as they could after that also, because they wanted to keep the model sales up. So, and you know, it shows up in the Trouble with Tribbles, and like I said, the original was Elena Troyes, and the Enterprise incident, and all of a sudden, you know, and this is, of course, this is just a painted wood block. That's that. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that little bit of history. I got to go to bed early tonight and get up early tomorrow and go off to work. And I'll be out on safari for 3 days, and maybe I can get back to work on some. I'm not taking a model with me. I looked at my schedule. I'm not going to have any time to work on it. It's going to be one of those brutal schedules. And so it is what it is. But guys, well, just one final side note. I also noticed, which made me think that Gearbox Toys might have been behind some of the Star Trek stuff, that a lot of the Star Trek kids that Revell was putting out are snap tights. And I'm starting to think Play Value, maybe toy company behind that. And I could be wrong on that. I haven't been able to find out any details. Anyway, that's my last little tidbit. I will let you guys go. Have a wonderful evening and model on.